Pozdravljeni danes v četrti lekciji, čisto preden se začne Slovenija Global Game Jam dogodek na to sredo 27. januarja 2021. In naš gost danes je Brin Žvan, študent na Kopenhagenski IT University, kjer študira game design. Brin Žvan je tudi dolgoletni entuzijastični obiskovalec Global Game Jamov, tudi zelo aktiven na skupnosti Slow Game Dev. Znanje po svojih številčnih, bom rekel, zelo številčnih eksperimentalnih mini iger tudi zelo promoviraš ta način, da v bistvu čim več delamo čim večje število eksperimentov in se pač iz tega učimo tudi, kjer stvari delujejo, kjer ne. In Brin nam bo danes v svojem predavanju razložil tudi svoj model, ki ga priporoča tudi za dogodek, kot je Game Jam, kaj je najbolj pomembno pri razvoju igre, kjer imate samo 48 ur časa. Čeprav tehnično letos bo malo več časa. Začnemo danes ob 7 na Discord kanalu Slow Game Dev. Dobite link v komentar, takoj ko Brin začne svoje predavanje. In danes bomo na Global Game Jamu delali se pravi prezentacije teme. Danes začnemo zato, ker tema je že za razliko od prejšnjih let dokaj javna. Mislim, jo lahko pobrskate, če hočete. Zato, da danes začnemo z organizacijo ekip, se pravi tema, brainstorming, pičanje in sestava ekip. Tako da se lahko ekipe med sabo zmenite, kako boste delovali v tem. In potem se pa načrtuje tisti glavni dogajanje, glavni začetek pa res v petek zvečer in potem traja do nedelje. Tako da, Brin, pozdravljen.
Zdravo. Zdaj sem eno stvar mi povej, boma v angleščini imela samo predavanje ali v slovenščini?
That is a good point. Yes, that is a good point, Brin. Thank you a lot. I have just came. So for any of you that you have just heard my previous talk, that was in Slovenian. I'm sorry, I will switch to English. So what basically I was telling that Brin Žvan is studying IT University in Copenhagen in game design, master, right?
Yeah, master.
Master in game design. And I was explaining that he's an active member of Slow Game Dev community. And he's known to create a lot of experiments with gameplay, right? And that he will tell us more today about his model on what to focus on when you're creating a game in 24 hours. And then later on, I just explained a little bit more about Global Game Jam or Slovenia Global Game Jam that is this year for the first time online. And it's getting a little bit extended to more than 48 hours. But today we're just starting at 7 with a theme reveal, brainstorming, and then after brainstorming comes pitching and team creation. And then the official, because it's still a work week, we still have jobs. We are starting kind of like really making some community events on Friday night. Also tomorrow we have a small live drawing session with Maja Vaupatic, which is going to be more about digital illustrators coming together, drawing and having fun. And we can look at it while they're making stuff. So, Brin, it's your time.
Okay. Thank you, Žiga, for the introduction and everything. Just let me know, like, can you see the screen? Is everything okay here? Žiga, could you just like give me a vocal thumbs up or thumbs down because I can see you?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
it's
Awesome.
working.
All right, so let's begin then. Like Giga said, I'll be talking a little bit about how to approach creating games inside of a game jam and what I like to call like the instant game development model. This is not something that I necessarily came up with. However, I will share like my experiences through developing game and participating in a crap ton of game jams and what I've learned through them, what I think are like the most important things and what I think like you can avoid or how you can replace things, skip them, so on. But primarily, I'll be talking about like 5 different things. So if none of these things interest you, then like you can leave. Okay. But let's see if they do. First of all, I'll be talking about like this whole instant games model and why you should even consider making a game in such a manner. Secondly, I will talk about creating tools, about like the first process of what you're going to be creating when you are making a game inside of a game jam. Thirdly, I'll talk about the content that you're going to be creating because like without a content, a game is not a game. Fourthly, we'll talk about testing that content because that's when you realize all of your plans, well, they have been useless and you need to change everything anyway. And lastly, we'll talk about juicing up your game, so making it more interesting. And throughout all of these like 5 stages of the talk, I'll try to go with this narrative that making a game is kind of like cooking instant noodles. Hopefully it sticks with you, but if like this is not the kind of stuff that you're into, don't worry, like we can probably find analogies for different kind of food that's maybe a bit more healthy than instant noodles. But first, let's go ahead like into this whole instant game development model, or what like was coined as 444. So when you have 48 hours, the idea is that you make a game in 4 hours, and then you spend the rest like the 44 hours like okay primarily making the game better, but also doing a little bit of sleeping, right? But how this ties in with the whole instant noodle analogy is that let's say you have 15 minutes to prepare a meal, right? You could try to like grab a chicken out of your freezer and unfreeze it and quickly like put the oven on 400 degrees so it would heat up really fast. Then throw the kitchen inside of the oven and hopefully it comes out good. And maybe like you run a bit over time, but maybe you're like at least you end up with something. Or instead of like trying to use up all of those 15 minutes to prepare a meal, you could take 3 of those minutes to prepare like instant noodles that are gonna take you 3 minutes, and then spend the rest of those 12 minutes that you have left trying to make the instant noodles taste good, right? So trying to add some sort of spices to them to maybe make them a bit more flavorful, experimenting with what you have. So if you have noodles, maybe like you can fry them, like forget the soup part, throw it away, right? But like take the noodles that you have and put them in a pan and you end up with a completely different dish, right? Like, so if any students out there, take notes. This is how you make your meals varied throughout the day. First like noodle soup in the morning, then fried noodles in the evening. But yeah, like that's the point, right? Like you take something and you make something really really small, and then you spend the rest of the time that you have iterating on those things. And one of the things to remember here is that creating games is a creative process, and like every creative process, iteration is king, because the first idea and the first thing that you create is never going to be the best one. So if you allow yourself to have this extra time, to have this chance to reiterate things, to try them out in a different version, you are bound to end up with the better product. You are bound to create a better game. And even if the second and the third version are not better, well, you always have like the first version to go back to, and you can always do that. Whereas if you spend all 48 hours creating a game, right? Then you are banking on that one, like on that one version of your game to be a good version of that game, which is necessarily not always going to be true. So if you allow yourself time to iterate, you're just like statistically looking much more likely to create a game that is good. So yeah, basically make something really fast, because then having extra time will allow you to iterate on it, and iterating on things allows them to become good. So let's talk a little bit about like the first part of the process here, which is where you're gonna go in and start like playing around with your tools. I just want to mention here at the start, right? Like if we're keeping up with this analogy of cooking noodles, tools that you are using are essentially just different ways to heat up water, right? Like I don't care if you use Unity, like a microwave to heat up your water. I don't care if you use Unreal, or I don't care if you use Game Maker, right? At the end of the day, as long as you can heat up your water to cook the noodles, it doesn't matter. And you should just use whatever it is you're comfortable with. And yes, there are tools that are like more specific towards like heating up water, like a water heater, or like RPG Maker and Twine, if we continue with this analogy, right? And if you're comfortable with using them, use those. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you like try learning a completely new tool when it comes to a game jam, because that's a completely different ordeal. And while it can be like a fun experience and a very nice learning experience, you won't necessarily end up like with the best version of a game. But like my talk here is more geared towards how to like create a good game in this time, not how to learn a completely new tool, which is also like a perfectly valid like reason and excuse to use game jams for, right? To try to learn something new. It's just like not something that we're gonna be tackling here. It's more like how do we make those noodles good, not let's try to cook a chicken for the first time in 15 minutes. So yeah, that's just like a small preamble about engines and tools. And now let's talk about like asset creation, because like when you are starting to create a game in those like first 4 hours that you do have, one of the first things that you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to create assets. And sometimes what happens is that you don't have everybody on a team that you need to create assets that you would consider to be like the main assets of a game, right? So you might consider, okay, we need somebody to write code. We need somebody to create art for us. We need somebody to create music and sound effects for us. But a lot of times you don't have everybody on the team that can do this sort of stuff. And lucky for you, there are a lot of different ways to go around this. And the most important thing to remember is don't forget about the things you don't have. Even if you don't have an artist and you're making a 2D game, don't forget about the 2D art. Don't just put in like uh, squares or like just like Unity, like basic sprite that comes in Unity and forget about it until the end of the jam, right? Try to think about this sort of stuff from the start, because all of these parts together are like working towards creating a game. And this is especially true for sound. I've been to like thousands of jams where sound was added in the last minute. And yes, in the end, we ended up having sound, but the sound kind of never really fit. So try to like think about all of these things at the start. But again, even if you can't make this sort of stuff, there are always ways to obtain this. The first one is by using generators, right? Like there's a lot of art generators and sound generators online. For example, there's this one called ZZ Sprite, which allows you to like generate small NES style sprites that you can use. It can even create animations for you, or at least there's a version out there that allows you to create animations. So you can get like art assets by literally just clicking a button. It's not a replacement for an artist, right? And like if you have an artist, treat them well, because this machine obviously can't replace them, but you get something that looks coherent and something that is interesting, right? So you aren't just using like the default sprites that come with whatever engine you are using. And the same goes for music and sound effects. There are a lot of like sound generators, like Chiptune and SFXia and SFXer most famously. But what I would recommend is that you also try to look on websites that allow you to get licensing, like openly licensed sound effects and music. I really like Newgrounds for that, because like there's literally a box that tells you, can you use this in your game, yes or no? And it's really easy to like sort through music because of that and see like what you are able to legally use and what you aren't legally able to use. Um, but there's a ton of different websites out there for this sort of stuff, right? And the same applies to a certain degree for programming. You might not be able yourself how you might not know yourself how to program something, but I'm sure that somebody did it before you. Especially if you're using Unity, there's Unity script collection, Unity library, where you can literally you search for like what sort of a thing are you looking for, or you have like categorical breakdown. This is like a bit of a like iffy topic, because sometimes you then end up using a script that you don't know quite well, and like you don't really understand how it works, and that can like lead you to some crappy situations where you aren't sure how to fix something. But it is something that you might want to consider, and these are all valid ways of creating a game, right? Like simply having one of these parts is not going to create a game. Combining them together and then using them in a creative way is what creates a game. So don't be afraid of using assets that were already made by somebody if nobody on your team can use that, can create them. Or don't be worried about like using scripts that somebody else made before you. These things don't devalue what you are creating in the end, right? Like if we all want to, like you can always say, oh, but you didn't really make that thing because blah blah blah, right? And then in the end, we're all gonna be writing like compilers and stuff like that if you want to go further back. So don't be afraid of using these tools that exist out there to help you out with things you aren't the most comfortable with. Just don't forget about any aspect of a game. Don't forget about the music. Don't forget about the art. Don't forget about the sound effects, and of course about like the scriptable code and stuff that that will create the interactions in your game. But during those like first 4 hours, right? Like while you are creating all of these sort of things, you want to focus on just like creating a baseline for your game, for something that is gonna have a start and something that is gonna have a finish. And then the stuff in between is like up till the other 44 hours to be created, right? So in the first 4 hours, try to create something that has a start and something that has an end. And this might sound like very outlandish if you're not used to this sort of work. Like, how the hell will I create something with a start and an end in 4 hours? Look, try to do it. And worst case scenario, or like the normal scenario, is that you won't be able to do it in 4 hours. But at least you try to set the scope for something that you can create in 4 hours. And realistically looking at it, you're going to make it in 8 hours and you will still have 40 hours to create the rest of the game, right? It's also just like a nice thing to try to think, what can we do in 4 hours? Because we're always going to overestimate how much we can do, and we're not going to think about like all of the bugs and the issues that we're going to run into. So by forcing yourself to think about 4 hours, in the end, you usually end up with something that you're going to make in 8 hours or maybe 16 hours, and you still have leftover time to do the rest of the stuff that we're going to talk about next. And the first of those things is going to be creating content. So when I say creating content, what I'm essentially talking about is creating something that is going to be that is going to give playtime to your game, right? A lot of times, what happened to me at the start when I started jamming was that we would create the assets, we would create the art, the animations, we would make the like enemies interacting with the player, or I don't know, like city building, build up and stuff, right? Like the elements that make up the gameplay. But we didn't have the gameplay itself. Just because like you have an enemy that is walking around and a player that can jump on that enemy and kill it, that doesn't mean you have a game. You need to create a level around this. No, I don't want to call like this part of this lecture level creation, because not every game has levels, right? But essentially, this is what we're talking about here, right? It's creating playable content for the player. And if you want to again draw this analogy with making noodles, I would say this is essentially like serving food to somebody, right? If you theoretically cook up your noodles in a pot and they're cooked, but you don't serve them to anybody, then those noodles essentially do not exist because you haven't like provided them to anybody to play, right? So when we are making content, we are essentially serving our noodles in different ways, right? We are creating I don't know, like a very formal level or a very formal serving of the noodles. We're creating like a very casual one that has like is served in a way as you would serve dessert, right? But basically, you are creating situations for the player to interact with the elements being the noodles that you have created in the first, ideally, 4 hours. And why I have like all of these emojis jumping around here is because I feel like the best way to go about this is to consider how can you use these tools to evoke emotions inside of your players, right? So if you have created like a basic 2D platformer or like a top-down shooter or something, right? You might want to think, okay, we're making a game about escaping from somebody. How can we accommodate for this? And then if you create like a very long and narrow corridor and you have an enemy chasing the player through that corridor, you're going to make the player feel like they're actually running away from somebody because there's like no other way they can go. Or maybe you want to make the player feel like they have an abundance of like they are experiencing some sort of eureka moment, like an abundance of materials, right? Then you might want to put them like in a situation where they can like very freely play with their abilities, where they have like a large open space. Um, Especially when it comes to like these more traditional games where you are controlling some sort of a character, a good thing to draw inspiration from here is architecture. So if you wanna create a a space inside of your game that feels that feels grand, that feels epic. Try to think of like some real world examples where you feel grand and epic, right? Like try to think of the theater in your hometown. How does that feel? Does that feel good to you? Why does it feel good to you? Okay, you have like a very high ceiling that makes it feel like you're entering a building that is much bigger than it actually is. And try to apply those sort of things into like the world that you are building. Because essentially, like when it comes to level design, inside of games where you are controlling some sort of a character, creating a level is just building stuff. Like we literally call it building stuff, right? Like it's architecture in a sense. So you can draw a lot of inspiration from architecture itself. And if you are making a game that is not like directly um, played through like some sort of an avatar that the player is possessing and moving around, try to think about like the feeling and the situation that those and the situations in the real world that give you this sort of feelings, right? Maybe you're making a game about managing a bank, right? Like what sort of a situation makes like what sort of a feeling do you want to convey? Do you want to convey pressure? Okay, how do we like use the tools that we have to convey this pressure? So maybe I don't know, like the player gets a lot of like requests to do something at one time, right? Like it's creating pressure. You are using the tools that you have built before in ways to try to evoke some sort of an emotion from the player. But again, most importantly, cannot skip this step, because if you skip this step, like if you are in hour 44 and you're just thinking to yourself, okay, the last 2 hours we're just gonna make a level and it's gonna be easy and it's gonna be great, you will not be able to create something of high quality, because like I said before, this sort of things require iteration. You will need to like see how your tools work or do not work together. You made yourself Lego bricks, now try to build something out of those Lego bricks. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is testing content, right? So once you made some content, you need to test it as soon as possible. It doesn't even need to be finished content, right? Maybe we started putting in some like extra ingredients into our noodle soup, and started thinking, okay, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be fantastic. We added tomatoes into our noodle soup, right? Like our noodle soup is now going to be a lot cooler because we added something extra in there that is not expected, because it's cooler now. But we, as the chefs, we are biased because we know that we put in those noodles, put in those tomatoes, right? We know what happened there, and we know why we put them there. What was our intent? However, we can't be sure that everybody else will, first of all, even notice those things, and secondly, feel the same way about them. Let's try like feeding this little fella the noodles with the tomatoes that we gave him, right? He's gonna eat those noodles, and now he's gonna ask them like if we can put some tomatoes into these noodles. He thinks that would be a great idea, even though we already put tomatoes in. And I'm giving this example because a lot of times in game development, in a jam, when you aren't doing any testing, or if you don't do any testing, you end up on one of the two extremes. Either you create things that are like way too plentiful and it feels like there's way too much of something, or there's way too little of something. But because you know that you put it in, your brain tricks you and your brain is telling you, no, it's fine, we put in tomatoes. This guy doesn't have any clue. But here it is important to listen what the player is saying or how the player is feeling, and then adjusting based on those reactions. Just a small tangent here, I would really recommend when you do give somebody like a game to test or like noodles to try out, don't tell them what you put in the game, don't tell them what you did, just give them the thing and let them play it and observe them. Ask them to share the screen, like ask them after they're done how they felt about the thing, and that's it. Don't tell them, hey, I put tomatoes in these noodles, because then they will be looking out for tomatoes, right? Or if they run into a bug, don't tell them, hey, here you just need to do blah, 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 or if they get stuck, right? Let them play the game on their own, because you don't get shipped with the game, right? When you're gonna put the game on itch at the end of 48 hours, you will not be in a situation where if somebody runs into an issue, you will pop up on their screen like Bonesy Body and tell them, hello, you should press the left button here to be able to pass this puzzle. No, like this doesn't happen. So just let the player play, observe what they are doing, and then adjust accordingly, right? So let's adjust accordingly. Let's add a few more like tomatoes into this soup, right? And hopefully the guy likes the soup now a lot more. So here, don't just test the thing once and then adjust things. After you adjust anything, you want to test stuff again. And you really don't have an excuse for not doing this because like if you are going to be participating in a jam, at least like in the Slovenian Discord, you can always ask people inside of the Discord to test your stuff. And if you're too shy for that, you can send me a personal message. I'm like somewhere on the right side of the members, and I'll be very happy to test your game out. Just like it might take me some time because I'm also making a game, but there's always going to be somebody willing to test. If there's nobody, message me and I'll test the game for you. So hopefully, like, now you realize that making content is important, and the testing out that content is also important. And the last thing we'll talk about is juicing content, right? So if you aren't familiar with the term juice in video games, it's basically making things react on what they are doing, right? It's adding something to the game that isn't necessarily gameplay and could hardly be quantified as like art assets, right? It's not necessarily somebody drawing a new character. It's you like making the character bob and jump a little, right? Making sure that there's always something happening on the screen and reacting to what the player is doing. Because like if you look at this scene right now that you see, right, like of this soy sauce and the noodles, it seems very stale because there's nothing going on, right? But if you just add like a tiny bit of spice to this thing and you make like the noodles move a little bit, we add quite a lot of visual noise into the whole thing, and it feels like there's a lot more going on here. This is important because we want to give the player feedback to what is going on, and we want to make the player feel like the world is alive. A good thing to consider when you are trying to add juice to your game, especially when it comes to like impact sort of stuff. So for example, look, like when I click on this soy sauce, right, like it does like a little whoop, right? It doesn't just like drop the like soy like droplet thingy. It like does a little animation in front of that. And this is juice, right? It's like things reacting to me clicking on stuff alongside this like passive noise that is happening in the world. And try to consider like what happens in the real world when you are doing something. No matter what you do, like if I like open this, like I hear a sound and like there is this tactile feelingness to me opening this chapstick, right? And this is what you're trying to replicate. I don't, technically speaking, if my game is about putting chapstick on my lips, I don't need this sound, but it's very satisfying. And there is some tactileness to this thing, right? And that's what you are trying to replicate when you are adding juice. And you do that, first of all, like through making things move a little bit, and also through adding sounds. And that's why I think it's really important to think at the start already, where do we want to put in sounds, right? Whenever you want to put in some sort of a sound, whenever you are programming something that you think should deserve to have a sound effect added to it, you should just like put a placeholder sound there while you are programming it. So it's going to be super easy to replicate and to replace it later down the line, right? So let's quickly go over everything one more time, just as a recap, right? First of all, make games in 4 hours, or try to make games in 4 hours. You're not gonna do it, but like if you go out with the goal of making a game in 4 hours, you're much more likely to have a lot of time left to iterate on that game. Use whatever tools you're comfortable with. If you can't do something, use a robot to do that, or take stuff from the internet that is already done. There's nothing wrong with that. When you're making content, think about how that content is making the player feel. When you're testing content, listen to the player, but most importantly, test the content in the first place and don't tell them anything in between. Just let them do their thing. And add tiny little interactions to whatever it is you are creating. Because like juice is kind of like salt in food, right? Like, or soy sauce when you're making noodles. Like it doesn't make your game good, juice that is. But if it's missing, it's gonna feel weird, right? It's like eating soup that wasn't salted. It's not the salt that makes the soup good or bad. But if there is no salt, it feels wrong. And the same applies to juice, because like juice is trying to replicate the tactileness of real world objects. So that's really it for me. If you want to see what game I'll be making, you can follow me on Twitter. I'll surely be posting some gifs and horrendous like results that we're gonna end up making. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brin. It was actually, I had while I was listening to you, I had a lot of associations on Flappy Bird. for some reason. And we can I guess especially the last part of the juice, we can talk about that more, because I feel like when like the Flappy Bird phenomenon came out, uh, it's like it was not a novel idea in terms of gameplay, but for some reason it made a big difference. And I guess that is kind of a question. Like, what do you think made it like a difference? Why it became
I
so
think
popular?
like for Flappy Birds, it was a really, really good use of controls, right? Not like you said, the gameplay itself wasn't super innovative. There was one game, like one Flash game, that was literally the same game gameplay wise, but it's just putting stuff on a touch screen and being able to actually pull a string, right? Like the tactileness of that, the feeling of how you're doing this sort of stuff was just right. Like it felt right that if you see like a bowstring on your like touch screen, that you can pull that and that something is going to happen. And I think like when it comes to controls, Flappy Bird did a really good job there because it did feel tactile. It felt like a real world object. And I think like when it comes to this sort of stuff, that's what makes you like not leave the game. It doesn't make you stay in there, right?
Mhm.
Nobody that plays a lot of Flappy Birds tells you, oh, I really love Flappy Birds because of like the sound effect that it does and because of like the little vibration motor that starts. They play it because of the interesting level. But it's at the start when you first pick up the game and when the game feels right, that these sort of things make a difference, right? Because maybe if you were controlling like the shooting with virtual buttons in Flappy Bird, it would feel completely differently, and then people wouldn't play because it wouldn't feel right to them. It's like
Mhm.
that first contact. It's You're essentially trying to make the player like fall in love with your game by adding like these micro interactions and those like little things to it.
Yeah, and they even the sound of like when you fail, that was then also kind of explained as to make failing fun. So it doesn't feel like, oh shit, it's like here we go again. But it's like it made it fun. So like even if you then immediately hit the sound effect and the kind of animation of the bird hitting the floor itself, it's like a detail, but a detail that made it like almost like you were not sad when you failed.
Yeah,
It's like you
yeah,
just start
exactly.
again, and like
There's like
the
some
smooth transition.
there's some more other examples of like making failing fun is Jetpack Joyride, right? So like the game where you tap on the screen to get like a guy flying with a jetpack. When you die there, your character like it doesn't go like game over. Your character like actually falls for a tiny bit further, right? So then you're hoping, oh, please pick up the coins, like please do these things that I need to do while you are not really controlling the character. So it makes
Mhm.
like that moment interesting and tense itself, even after you are taken out of the game. Or Super Meat Boy does it in a completely different way, where after you complete a level successfully, it shows you a replay of all of the runs that you did on the level at the same time, right? Like, so you see 100 characters jumping and dying, and then you kind of see, like, oh, I was dying the most on this point, because, like, you literally see 50 different characters dying at that point. So it tries to make, like, it incorporates that as a part of the reward. It's like, okay, it doesn't matter if I fail this level 500 times because then I'm gonna see a hell of a cool replay once I'm actually able to beat it.
Yes, exactly. I guess in that matter, to just smooth the transition, and even to make it when you do succeed, to make it even more epic, because exactly of this. So it's not just like a small, oh yeah, I finished, but it's like a reward at the end. But let me now switch to a little bit different topic, more on your current studies. So maybe a lot of people are interested later on to design games, are now studying maybe computer science in Slovenia, or they are more into design aspect. And there doesn't exist yet a game design course in Slovenia, but you are studying a master's of game design in Copenhagen. And my question is, what is like what can you tell us? What does the study of game design look like?
So here for I think like here we try to it's kind of broken down into three different aspects. Like we have an aspect of actual design and actually making games. We have an aspect of programming, because like that's needed whether or not you are a programmer or not. It's always like useful to be able to understand what the heck is going on. And lastly, we have like there's a huge game studies fields here, which is more like sociology, but directly related to games, right? So I personally came here because of that first aspect, like making the actual games themselves, and most of my peers did as well. But I think like like this gives us like some more holistic approach to like what games are actually about. So you understand them like in a social structure, you understand them through like the technical aspect that they are, and through the actual end product, the games that we have here. So I'll mostly like talk about this like making games part, because that's I think what is interesting. And the other ones, like for me, they aren't the most interesting, but I would say that like no matter if like studying games like the actual course is interesting or not, um, it's like whenever you go and study any sort of a creative field, there is a huge opportunity there to just meet people that are also interested in the same thing, and just spend a lot of time, 2 years for me, to make games and to try to figure out like how does this whole game making thing even work. And you have like an academic structure that hopefully supports this. So it doesn't really matter, like in the end, if the course is good or not. You get into a community of people that want to make games as well, and you can make games with them for the next 2 years. So just from that perspective, studying games is really cool, because it's not something that you do on the weekend. It's something that you do every day, right? Like you go home with a homework of, okay, play Star Wars: The Old Republic and analyze how the story is handled in that game. Or you go home with the homework, make a prototype in 2 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these sort of things, and just the community part of that, allow you to grow as a game developer, as a game designer a lot, because it's the thing that you are primarily going to be focusing on. It
Mm-hmm.
also kind of like lets you figure out whether or not this is actually something you want to do, because now you're doing it full time. You're not doing it as a hobby anymore. Um, but I think it's worth it purely because of that community aspect, and purely because of the aspect of being able to create, to just focus on creating games. But to go like back to actually answering what the course is like, uh, for us, we spent like the first 7-ish weeks or so just creating a lot of different prototypes, to try to learn about what it means to like actually make a game. So try to make a lot of smaller games, and then in the last 7 weeks of the first semester, we spent making a longer game. You can actually play all of my games on my itch page if you wanna check out like the prototypes that we did. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I mean, if I cannot search right now, but maybe later on we
Yeah, I'll
can
link
add
it.
a link to the comments.
But yeah, like it was usually we got some sort of restriction. So essentially, like in a
Yeah.
sense, you could say we were game jamming every week. For example, in the very first week, we had to make a game in Puzzle Script. Puzzle
Mhm.
Script is like a super easy to understand game engine with a lot of limitations. So it forced, for example, the people that are more of on the tech side to try to use that engine in a creative way. And for the people that have never programmed before, it allowed them to create something tangible without having to know programming, right? Without having to actually
Mhm.
have a programming knowledge beforehand.
Actually, just on this topic, we have a
Mhm.
question from Sheshmeister. He's asking you more about like when you making a group like you're doing right now, or maybe even later on. Do you make the game design document? Like what kind of like
I
how
think
do
it
you go
really
about it?
like depends on the project size, right? Like if I'm making a prototype for myself for in 6 hours, I'm like gonna write down a few things in a notebook, and that's gonna be it. If I'm doing something with a team, like and like as soon as you start adding people in, like as soon as you start having the team aspect, game design documents and this sort of stuff becomes more and more important. And I think though for like a jam, for 48-hour jam, it's not the most important thing in the world. But you should have some sort of a North Star, right? You should have like a general idea written down in some Google document. Then everybody can go back and look at and think, oh, okay, so this is what we're working towards, right? And if you have somebody who is exclusively like doing design for your game, somebody who is not doing stuff in Unity or programming or doing level design, then it might be like beneficial for that person to actually write down like what the enemies are going to do, because then it's easier for the programmers to reference what's going on there. But just like on a personal note, I don't necessarily think that game design documents are the most important thing in the world, especially if you have like good team communication. And the thing is, a lot of times you just end up with like 20, 30 pages documents, like on an actual project in quotation marks, right? Something that takes multiple weeks, months to develop. And nobody wants to read that at the end of the day, right? It's just like, it feels like a Bible, like some holy book that you're supposed to follow, but maybe you don't even have an interest of reading it.
Yeah.
So I personally prefer just having like meetings and talking with people and figuring out what to do, and maybe trying to create like very bare bones design documents. For example, like in the bigger project that we had in university, how we did it was we had a whole bunch of flowcharts that I created like as design documents, right? So we had a flowchart of how the game is supposed to work. So we didn't just end up with like black text on white paper, because that's just boring to read and it doesn't give you the best representation of what's going on in the game.
It's more like just a set of agreements that you made with the team on what to do.
Yeah,
So it's
but
written
but
on the
I
paper.
I, I do think if you have a like a big team, right? We have an option in the third semester to do this thing where it's like a cross university collaboration thing, and you end up on a 16-person team and you're supposed to make a game, right? Like if you're managing so many people, you need to have like some sort of a design document, right? Whether you like those or not, because it's just impossible to keep the team on track when you have so many people. So the
Mhm.
bigger the team, the bigger the need to actually have a design document.
And maybe this is a question of my own, but it's kind of continuing this theme. And when you are then working with a team, do you use like what kind of project planning? Do you have do you use a certain program or software to help you with the project planning?
Like it's kind of like standard to use Kanban boards, like in both in the industry and on student projects as well. But at the end of the day, like it doesn't really matter what you use as long as it works for you. Just like with game engines, this is a way for you to heat up water. As long as you get like hot water in the end is good. You can like actually use post-it notes on a whiteboard for all I care, right? Just use some way to track what's going on. Just use some way to see, like, to be able to read what the designer wrote down should be the like rules of the game, right? It doesn't matter if you're using Word Online or Google Docs or like Whiteboard EO or whatever tool is going to be popular in the next few years, right? Try to learn like the principles instead of learning the tools themselves, because principles are going to be transferable, whereas tools, like, they come and go. Flash just died this year. It was the thing to make games in 15 years ago, right?
Yeah,
Unity is very popular
morning.
now. Maybe who knows where Unity is going to be in 15 years. So just, and the same goes for like all of these project planning things. Notion was not popular 3 years ago. It's super popular nowadays. So just have something, do something, but don't focus on the tool too much. Focus on what you're actually creating.
Mhm. And now a little bit more a different one, which is you talked today a lot about the model of what to focus on. But my question then to you is, how is your usual MVP then look like? What, like when you make your minimum viable, let's say, game, I guess.
Yeah.
How does it look like when you
So
make it?
I think you want a little bit of everything inside of your MVP, right? So if you have a musician and they're making music, try to put like the very first draft of everything in. So your first minimum viable product should have at least a sketch of every sprite that you want to use, at least like a sketch of a song that you want to use, placeholder sound effects where you want to use them, and it should have at least like one gameplay level. And I'm putting this again in quotation marks because not every game is comprised of levels, but it should have some gameplay in it, ideally, right? And again, this sort of stuff might sound like a lot, but I think it's just like a mentality shift that you need to make. It's not a creation, like your process should not be, I don't know, as an artist of creating a character first. It should be about like creating a sketch for everything that you want to use, right? And then for the programmer, it should be of creating dirty code for everything that is going to be interactable. And for the like whoever's going to be working on the level design, it should be of creating, like, showing that basic interaction in a very like very crude form, right? Just having like, what is your gameplay going to be consisting of? If you give somebody your MVP, so after like 4, 5, 6 hours, you should be able to perform one of those tests. right? You should be able to call a friend over on Discord and have them share their screen and play the game for 30 seconds or for 1 minute. It doesn't matter, but you should have like something for them to do. And they should be able to tell, okay, this is an enemy. Okay, this is my character. Whether that's like very ugly sketches on a napkin or whether that's like really nice art already, it doesn't matter. You just need to have something. So after, I would say the minimum viable prototype looks very, very rough, but it has everything. Like everything is rough. Nothing is a white box that needs to be later replaced.
Mhm. And what are you testing for first? For example, you have a game after 6 hours, and you want to have everything a little bit in
If
between.
people understand it, like if people get it, right? Because you might have like a good idea for a game and something that sounds like fun for you, but then you realize that it's really hard to explain this to people because like maybe they pick up the game and they have no clue what's going on, right? So it's more like clarity and how do we make the gameplay clear? How do we make it clear what's going on, right? Like I remember one time I made a game that was like about shooting. It was like a tower defense game where your towers were orbiting around a planet essentially, right? And I found it super hard to explain to people how to like build those actually build towers and how to actually defend yourself because like the art was very abstract. It wasn't very intuitive that like okay you can build there. So I spent the first like after the testing I spent the first portion of time trying to figure out okay how are we even going to solve this, because if your game is not clear to people they're just not gonna play it, right? They're gonna pick it up, they're gonna think, well, what is this? I don't understand this game is stupid. And you might think to yourself, no, it's just the person that doesn't understand it, right? But that's not what happens in reality. People don't tell themselves, oh, I'm the idiot. I need to learn how this thing works before I can use it. It's just like, no, that thing is stupid. It's the thing that you say like when you when you want to pull a door, but it's actually a push door. You don't say to yourself, oh, I am so stupid. I should have pushed this door. You think to yourself, oh, what a crappy door. Why does it not say anywhere that I need to push it instead of pulling it, right? So try to adjust the game in a way that it's gonna make sense. That's like usability, I guess, is the first thing I look out for.
The usability part, right? I guess later on you can test for if they can understand the mechanics. You can then change the level to kind of introduce them better,
Yeah. It's
more
like trying to
intuitively.
figure out, okay, are we gonna like tutorialize this by, I don't know, literally putting an arrow next to it and pointing it and writing like click on me or something along those lines? Are we going to like change the level in a sense that it's a lot easier to do these things at first? Are we going to like put a prompt before the game even starts? This is how you control the game, right? It's just figure out how you're going to make it clear to people what's going on in the game, because I feel like that's the first hurdle that you usually run into and the one that hurts the most, right? It doesn't matter in the end that like if you weigh like the options of somebody telling you, oh, I kind of think that the enemy looks bad, or I don't get the game, you want to fix that one first, right? Because if somebody doesn't get the game, then they don't get to the part where they get to tell you the enemy looks like shit. Fix that, right? If they get to that part and if they can tell you, oh, I think your art looks bad, or oh, I think I'm doing way too little damage, or oh, I'm not sure like if this is fun or like if this is too stressful for me or something along those lines, right? Then if they get to those parts, that's great because they understand what the game is about. But if they can't, then you need then you need to fix the usability of your game first.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that we have I have put the comment. You can find the link to the Slovenia or Slow Game Dev Discord channel, where the Slovenia Global Game Jam event will happen. We will start at 19 or a little bit later with the keynote and the theme inside. So it will stream inside the Discord channel. I hope Rok Kos is already there setting up the channel rooms, or and then we will start with the stream of the keynotes. So you can start right now. It's on YouTube if you can find it, but just save it for later so we can all watch together. But for you, I have another question in sort of your many experience, Brin. Like, what were your funniest kind of game dev bugs? that you've encountered in your development?
What was it? We were making this game about being a fish that's like deep underwater, and you had to like light up your way to see the world around yourself. And you were like an anglerfish, right? Like you had a light bulb or whatever it is they have in front of their, like, it's not actually a light bulb, but you have like a way to radiate light in front of yourself. And the lighting system like got inverted or something along those lines. Basically, anything that was supposed to give you light was giving you darkness, and anything that was supposed to give you darkness was giving you light. So we ended up like with a completely reversed game. It was fun for the 1 hour in some weird way, but it was also panicky because the game gave a completely different feeling. You didn't even know what you are, right? But everything, like, you were able to see the whole world, so that was nice. But yeah, like I think that would be it. I think the fun part of game development though is that when you do end up with bugs, usually they produce something that's interesting to look at. Whereas like in software development, if you get a bug, it's never fun, and you don't get the chance to like laugh at your own bug usually.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember at some point we would have like we were thinking actually this year. So anyone this is also for anyone that is now participating or will participate in a Slovenian Global Game Jam, to don't hide your bugs. Try to record them. Try to share them so we all have a laugh together. Because we will also, like, one of the award kind of categories is also like with the funniest bugs. So do collect those, record those, and we will have like a voting, I guess, like which one is the funniest. I'm not sure how we will record that. I mean, like a measurement of laugh or something, or just voting, but we will have some categories. So we have around 7 minutes until the start of the jam. This is for all of you listening. If you have like another question, you have a couple of minutes to put it on. Otherwise, oh, we have that's a quickly. So is it? I think. Sorry, I think this is just people talking in the comments. But my question then is, what are your plans for Global Game Jam?
I'm meeting up with some friends virtually and some that live in the same dorm as me non-virtually in a safe way, and we're gonna make a game together. Hopefully, we don't know yet what, but that out today. So, hopefully,
yes. But which event are you joining?
I don't think we're like joining any of events because we're from all over the world that like we're participating together, and we want to sleep, so we decided that we're just gonna like take the 4 days together and like just make something in these 4 days. So technically we're following the team, but we're breaking the rules by sleeping and not making it in 48 hours.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, this year is a little bit more relaxed because of the quarantines. We are at home. We have nice beds at home. We have showers. We have lots of food or we can go to the store downstairs. So no problem. But yeah, it's so this year is the online. So it's called Slovenia Global Game Jam for the first time. In 2014, when we start in KIBLA, it was called Maribor, I think, like Maribor Global Game Jam. And then it went for a couple of years. So I think it's like 14, 15, 17, 18, 19. So it's like already a seventh one. Did I make it correct? Sixth. Yeah, I think it's a sixth one because there was one missing in between. And then it was Ljubljana Global Game Jam. Now it's Slovenia Global Game Jam, right? And it's one event because it's all online. Next year, if hopefully we don't have quarantine anymore, because it's getting a little bit annoying. So we do maybe have 2 sites. We'll see. But thank you a lot, Brin. Thank you a lot for making this. It was a very nice presentation, very, very concise. I think also very needed for anyone who kind of programs, designs, wants to join a team, and you just kind of made them a brief overview of what's like really important. And I was, or I still am, Žiga Pavlović. I am a interaction designer. I do a lot of similar work, but more with interactive experiences for installations. And I am what is it called? A creative lead in KIBLIX Lab. KIBLIX Lab is a media laboratory. It's starting from the project of multimedia centers for research in arts and culture, or research centers for arts and culture. And we are now mostly working with 3D scanning, making assets for virtual reality, and create, like, with photogrammetry. So we scan things, we made them 3D, we put them into virtual to showcase. And that was an example now that we had to make a virtual gallery because the quarantines were closed. And this event is also being co-organized by KIBLIX, or as part of KIBLIX Festival, which is a computer arts festival going now for close to 20 years. And this year we had to, also because of the quarantine, kind of extend it. Usually it happens in December, but now we had to extend it to like 3 months, and maybe we'll just keep on going to the whole year, having events, having more panels, discussions on the topic of virtual reality, kind of more like virtual worlds, right? Because the title of the festival is Virtual Worlds now. Okay, we are finished. Again, look on the link in the now. There's a lot of comments on YouTube, but I'm not sure which one is the question. I guess none of it. But please read or click on the link. It's an invite link to the Discord channel of Slow Game Dev, where we will shortly start the Slovenia Global Game Jam. Thank you a lot, Brin. Thank you a lot, and see you on the Discord Slow Game Dev channel. Bye.